Welcome to A1 Storyteller, where real-life events and emotional journeys unfold in the most powerful and unforgettable ways. Today's story is one that will shake you to your core, not just because of what happened, but because of who it happened to, and the haunting truth it reveals about the world we live in. Imagine serving your country with honor. Imagine standing beside the most powerful people in the nation, trained to take a bullet without hesitation. Imagine protecting presidents, guarding secrets, sacrificing birthdays, holidays, and years of your life, all in the name of duty. Now imagine, despite all of that, being dragged across the pavement like a criminal just because of the color of your skin. This is the story of Agent Jamal Carter, a highly respected Black Secret Service agent who found himself on the wrong end of a pair of handcuffs, not because he broke the law, but because two police officers didn't think someone who looked like him could possibly wear the badge he carried. What happened next wasn't just shocking, it was devastating, humiliating, and enraging. But it also lit a fire that spread across the nation, igniting a storm of justice and heartbreak that no one saw coming. This isn't fiction. This isn't exaggeration. This is real. And once you hear what happened, once you see how far it went, how deep the pain ran, you will understand why this story matters more than ever. Get ready for a powerful ride. Get ready to feel anger, sadness, and pride, all in one. Because this is the story of what happens when a nation's protectors are betrayed by the very system they defend. This is A1 Storyteller, and this is Agent Carter's story. The sun had barely risen over Washington, D.C., as Jamal Carter stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the tie of his Secret Service uniform. For most people, putting on a suit meant going to the office or a formal event. For Jamal, it meant something more, was armor. As a Black man in America, he had always known the world saw him through a different lens. But when he wore that badge, that earpiece, and the lapel pin that marked him as one of the elite charged with protecting the nation's highest office, he hoped, just hoped, it would grant him the same respect afforded to his white colleagues. He kissed his sleeping daughter on the forehead, whispered a silent prayer, and headed out the door, unaware that today that uniform wouldn't protect him from what was coming. He arrived near the White House with precision, as always. He'd served through 2 administrations and had a spotless record. Never late, never careless, always prepared. So when dispatch called in a minor civilian disturbance nearby, Jamal responded instantly. It was routine. His job, after all, was to prevent chaos, not just respond to it. He walked calmly, professional in his demeanor, his presence alone enough to de-escalate most situations. But before he could even assess the scene, 2 local officers came barreling toward him. No questions, no verification, just eyes full of suspicion. To them, he wasn't an elite federal agent. He was just another Black man standing near an expensive SUV. And in that instant, everything he had worked for, every sacrifice he had made, every moment he spent proving he belonged, was erased. Jamal stood tall, even as the 2 officers approached with hostility burning in their eyes. His years of service had taught him to de-escalate, to use calm over conflict. But nothing could prepare him for the blatant disregard they showed. Not just for his authority, but for his humanity. Before they even spoke a word, their hands were on their holsters. One of them barked, a step away from the vehicle. "Put your hands where I can see them." Jamal raised his hands slowly, controlled, calculated, even though his heart was pounding in his chest. "Officers," he began, his voice even and composed. "I'm Agent Jamal Carter, United States Secret Service. I'm responding to a reported disturbance in this area." He reached slowly toward his jacket pocket to retrieve his credentials, but one officer lunged, grabbing his arm. "Don't move. Don't you dare reach. I'm just getting my ID," Jamal said, but his words fell into the void. They weren't listening. They weren't seeing. They weren't even trying. One of the officers shoved him against the SUV, slamming his face into the cold metal. The other twisted his arm behind his back and cuffed him painfully tight. "We've got another one pretending to be a cop," one sneered. Jamal didn't resist. He didn't shout, he didn't fight, because he knew that any sign of anger, any protest would become the excuse they were looking for. So he said it again, this time muffled against the car hood. "I'm Secret Service. My badge is in my left jacket pocket." But they ignored him. Jacket pocket. Every moment that passed was a wound. Every second his dignity was crushed beneath their boots. He remembered the day he graduated from training, the pride in his mother's eyes, the flag she held as she told her friends, "My baby protects the president." And now, those same hands that had protected the leader of the free world were twisted behind his back like a criminal's. Then he heard it. The clicking of phones, murmurs from the crowd that had begun to gather. Bystanders had seen the whole thing unfold. A middle-aged woman shouted, "He said he's Secret Service. Look in his pocket." A teenage boy held up his phone, recording with trembling hands. The cops shouted at the crowd to back up, but it was too late. The moment had been captured. The truth, raw and ugly, was being streamed in real time. Jamal, still pinned, finally turned his face toward the onlookers. His eyes weren't filled with rage. They were filled with something deeper. Sadness. Disbelief. A question no one could answer. How many times does a black man have to prove his worth before he's seen as human? The sound of squealing tires tore through the air like a siren of truth approaching. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled up fast, braking hard just feet away from the scene. The door flew open, and in an instant, several agents in dark suits leapt out, moving with precision and purpose. The presence was unmistakable. Secret Service. One of the agents, a tall woman with a stern jaw and the voice of command, barked to stand down. "That's Agent Carter. What the hell do you think you're doing?" The two cops froze. For the first time, hesitation flickered across their faces. But it was too late. Their hands were still on Jamal, who stood cuffed and breathless, the metal biting into his wrists, sweat and humiliation clinging to his skin like a second uniform. He didn't need to. His colleagues, his brothers and sisters in arms, had already seen everything. The female agent rushed forward and unlocked the cuffs with shaking hands. "Jamal," as she whispered, her voice trembling, not just with rage, but with something worse, grief. Jamal didn't respond. He couldn't. His throat was tight with emotion. Not from fear, not even from anger, but from the unbearable weight of betrayal. Not just by the two cops who had shoved him to the ground, but by the very system he had sworn to protect, a system that didn't even stop to ask who he was before deciding he didn't belong. The two officers, now visibly shaken, tried to defend themselves. He wasn't identifying himself clearly, one muttered. He reached into his pocket. "You mean his credentials?" The agent shot back, eyes blazing. "You tackled and cuffed a federal agent on duty in uniform because you saw a black man near a car and assumed the worst." Around them, the crowd was still recording. Some had tears in their eyes. Others shouted at the officers. "You never even asked his name," someone screamed. "He told you who he was." By now, supervisors and more law enforcement had arrived, but the damage had been done. Jamal stood surrounded by the people who were supposed to protect him, yet the humiliation stuck to his soul like tar. Cameras continued rolling, and within minutes, the video had hit social media. The hashtag started trending. Hashtag started trending. #Justice for Jamal. Justice for Jamal. The footage was raw, unfiltered pain, real-time injustice. Millions watched as a proud black Secret Service agent was cuffed like a common criminal, ignored, humiliated, his badge meaningless to men who couldn't see past his skin. The nation gasped. Families sat in their living rooms with tears streaming down their cheeks. People who had never spoken about race before suddenly had nothing else to say. And in the middle of it all stood Jamal, silent, wounded, but unbroken. The video swept across the internet like wildfire. Within hours, it had been shared by civil rights activists, news anchors, celebrities, and ordinary people who felt the gut-wrenching injustice echo deep within them. Millions of eyes watched as Agent Jamal Carter was pinned to the SUV, his voice calm but desperate, repeating that he was Secret Service. The cuffs, the slurs, the blank refusal to listen. It was all there, captured in 4K resolution with tears behind every frame. The footage didn't just show a man being wronged. It showed a nation sickness, a wound reopened, bleeding in front of a crowd that could no longer look away. People wept watching it, some in fury, some in heartbreak. An elderly black veteran posted a video of himself crying, saying he wore the uniform, he swore the oath, and they still saw him as a threat. And mothers across the country held their sons closer, praying silently that the world would see them as more than just their skin color. Children asked their parents, why did they hurt the man if he was a good guy? And there were no easy answers. Outside of politics, outside of parties and debates, what resonated was the raw truth of what had happened. The uniform hadn't shielded Jamal. His badge hadn't protected him. His badge. His excellence had not exempted him from racism. He had done everything right. And still, it hadn't been enough. Within a day, the Secret Service issued a public statement confirming Jamal's identity, praising his record, and condemning the officer's actions. They stood by their agent, and so did thousands of former and current federal employees who had worked with Jamal. They described him as disciplined, brilliant, deeply loyal, a man who would take a bullet for anyone, even the officers who had humiliated him. That truth struck a nerve. It wasn't just about race anymore. It was about the aching realization that our most honorable were being treated like criminals just for existing. As national attention mounted, the two officers were placed on administrative leave. Investigations were launched. But that did little to ease the storm. Where people flooded the police department's social media with demands for accountability. Rallies formed in D.C., peaceful but passionate, where people held signs that read, "He protected us. Who protected him?" An A badge didn't save Jamal. Justice must. Meanwhile, Jamal sat quietly in his home. His daughter climbed into his lap and laid her head on his chest, and for a long time he just held her. Her innocence, her safety, those were the things he had fought for. And yet, in a cruel twist, he now had to explain why he'd been treated like a threat in broad daylight. When his supervisor came to visit, Jamal finally asked, "Would it have been different if I looked like someone else?" The silence in the room was louder than any siren. The next day, Jamal was invited to a community event where families gathered to show support. As he arrived, still silent, still carrying the weight of it all, the crowd stood. Hundreds of people clapped. Some cried. Children held drawings they'd made of him with his Secret Service pin. One little girl handed him a note that simply said, "You are my hero." But it wasn't until a boy, no older than 12, came up to him, his voice shaking, and said, "I want to be like you, even if it's hard," that Jamal felt the tears slip free. Because despite everything, despite the cuffs, the cruelty, the humiliation, he had become a symbol. Not of what was broken, but of what could be rebuilt, of what could still be believed in. And as the crowd surrounded him, strangers now family, Jamal Carter stood quietly in the middle of them all, not just as a federal agent, not just as a black man, but as a testament to what it means to rise after being broken. The crowd's chants still echoed faintly in the distance when a sharp convoy of black vehicles pulled up outside the precinct. Out stepped more agents, this time in full formal uniform, the kind worn only for official matters of grave importance. With no hesitation, they entered the building, demanding an immediate meeting with the chief. Paperwork was pushed aside, excuses silenced. The Secret Service didn't come quietly when one of their own had been humiliated. Back outside, Jamal sat on a bench, shoulders heavy, his body present but his spirit somewhere distant. He barely looked up when the door opened behind him, but he felt the familiar grip on his shoulder, a hand that didn't restrain, but reassured. It was Director Monroe, his superior and mentor. Come inside," he said gently, voice thick with emotion. Inside, there was no paperwork, no ceremony. The cuffs were already gone, but now came the apology. Not from the officers who stood with eyes downcast in shame, but from the higher-ups who finally recognized the magnitude of their failure. But Jamal didn't need words. He needed truth. And when his colleagues stood beside him, silent and strong, it was all he needed to know. He wasn't alone anymore. When he stepped out of the precinct, his head held higher this time. The people outside erupted in applause. He didn't wave. He didn't speak. He just looked at the faces, black, white, brown, young, old, and in that moment, he understood. This wasn't just about him anymore. The sun was beginning to set, casting long golden shadows over the crowd that still lingered, waiting, hoping to see Jamal one more time. As he stepped forward, his daughter ran to him, her tiny arms wrapping around his waist. He knelt down to meet her eyes, the weight of the day softening in that single quiet moment. "Daddy, are you okay now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, though the truth lay somewhere deeper. Wounds like his didn't heal overnight. But her presence reminded him why he endured, why he rose every morning and put on that suit, why he believed that dignity had to be fought for. The cameras returned, this time not as weapons but as witnesses. Jamal turned toward the sea of strangers, now allies, and spoke for the first time since the incident. "I didn't want to be a symbol," he said quietly. "I just wanted to serve. But maybe what happened to me wasn't just mine to carry." His voice cracked, but he didn't turn away. If my pain can open someone's eyes, if it can protect someone else's child, maybe that's the purpose in all of this. Tears flowed openly from those listening. His strength wasn't in his badge or his title. It was in his humility, in his refusal to hate, even when hate had tried to strip him of everything. He didn't ask for justice just for himself. He asked for it for all those still unseen, still unheard. In that moment, Jamal Carter didn't just reclaim his name. He gave hope to an entire nation. Thank you for watching A1 Storyteller and experiencing this heart-wrenching journey with us. The story of Agent Jamal Carter is not just about one man's fight for justice. It's about the fight of countless others who face discrimination, who are judged before they are ever given a chance. It's about the broken systems that need to be rebuilt and the strength of those who rise despite them. Jamal's story is a reminder that even when we are pushed to our limits, there is power in standing up for what is right. His bravery, his humility, and his unyielding hope have sparked a movement that calls for change. And while the pain of that day will never fade, the fight for justice continues, driven by the love of family, the support of friends, and the courage of every person who refuses to remain silent. As we close today, let us remember, this story is not over. Justice doesn't end with a single victory. It is a constant battle that we all must fight together. Jamal's courage isn't just his. It belongs to all of us. It's time to rise, it's time to speak, and it's time to make sure stories like his are heard everywhere by everyone. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. Stay tuned, and let's keep telling the stories that matter.